Imagine a fisherman from Galilee, thousands of miles from home.
Right, way outside his comfort zone.
Exactly. And he's requesting to be crucified upside down in the capital of the Roman Empire just because he felt utterly unworthy to die in the exact same manner as his teacher.
It's just a wild image to start with.
It really is.
Yeah.
So welcome to the deep dive.
Mhm.
Today, we are looking at how that single brutal event, sparked this massive ancient archaeological mystery.
In a 1,000-year church schism.
Yeah, a total split.
Mm.
We are tracing the final days of the Apostle Peter, the hunt for his literal bones beneath the Vatican, and, well, how his legacy essentially created a 2,000-year-old global institution.
And to do this, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
Oh, the sources are amazing this time around.
They are. We have the official archaeological reports from the Vatican necropolis, early Christian letters, some apocryphal texts.
Which are those early writings that were super popular but, didn't make the official cut for the New Testament, right?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, we've got historical tracts debating papal primacy and some deeply layered theological breakdowns of Eastern Orthodox versus Roman Catholic Church structures.
Yeah, and as we dig into these sources, we should probably set some ground rules for you listening because, well, it's worth noting right up front that we are looking at some heavily contested history here.
Oh, absolutely. The sources contain some very strong, very contrasting viewpoints.
Right. I mean, we've got Protestant critics, Catholic apologists, Orthodox theologians, and they are all reading the exact same ancient texts very differently.
So just to be clear, our job today is not to pick a theological winner. We're not endorsing any religious claims here.
No, not at all.
We're just impartially unpacking how these ancient arguments actually work and, how they ended up shaping the modern world.
So, okay, the best place to start is probably with the most foundational question of this entire cold case.
Right, because before anyone can go looking for Peter's bones beneath the Vatican, we kind of have to figure out if he actually died in Rome.
Which, looking at the sources, you quickly realize is a surprisingly hotly debated topic. It's not a given.
No, it's really not. I mean, the sources highlight a major critique from Protestant authors, like Lorraine Boatner, for example.
Yeah, Boatner points out this glaring omission. He's like, look, the New Testament never explicitly mentions Peter being in Rome.
Right, which is weird when you think about it.
It is, because Paul wrote extensively, right?
Mm.
And his journey to Rome is detailed in the book of Acts. But Paul never once mentions Peter being there with him.
Yeah, so for Boatner and, similar critics, the idea that Peter was the first bishop of Rome, it rests purely on legend, like later tradition rather than actual scripture.
But the sources do offer a pretty wild rebuttal to that, right?
They do. It's a compelling argument if you are only looking for the explicit geographical name Rome in the biblical text. But the rebuttal points to this sort of ancient cryptography.
The Babylon Code.
Exactly. In Peter's first epistle, he sends greetings from, quote, the church here in Babylon. But by the 1st century, the actual city of Babylon in Mesopotamia was, well, it was essentially an inconsequential ruin out in the desert.
It definitely wasn't a major, thriving hub of early Christianity, so why would he call it Babylon?
Well, ancient writers like Eusebius and texts like the Sibylline oracles and the Book of Revelation, they heavily used Babylon as a protective code word for Rome.
Yeah.
You really have to put yourself in the mindset of the 1st century church here. This was a time of intense imperial persecution. Christians were viewed by the Roman authorities as this illegal subversive sect.
Right, so advertising in a widely circulated letter that your top leader was hiding out in the very capital of the empire, that would have been a catastrophic security breach.
Exactly. It's terrible OPSEC. And theologically, Rome was the new Babylon. It was the empire currently oppressing God's people, just like the original Babylon had done centuries before.
Okay, let's unpack this, though, because I look at this and wonder, is it possible early Christians were just retrofitting the narrative?
What do you mean?
Could later church leaders have looked at that vague reference to Babylon and said, oh yeah, Babylon totally meant Rome, so Peter was definitely here, just to justify Rome's growing power later on?
That's a great point, and critical historians ask that exact same question. If the first epistle of Peter was literally our only source, that skepticism might completely win out.
Right.
But we have to look at the overwhelming consensus of early extra-biblical writers.
The guys writing outside the New Testament.
Yeah. We're talking about figures who wrote just a few decades after Peter's death, long before Rome centralized its power. You have Clement of Rome, writing before AD 97.
Yeah.
You have Ignatius of Antioch around AD 110 and Irenaeus around AD 190. And they all, completely independently of one another, record Peter's presence in Rome.
Wow, so it's a pretty strong consensus.
Very strong. And they specifically note his martyrdom there, alongside Paul, likely during the violent scapegoating of Christians under Emperor Nero around AD 64.
And the details of that martyrdom from the sources are just incredibly visceral.
Oh, they are.
Like the Acts of Peter, which is an apocryphal text from the 2nd century, and later the scholar Origen. They provide that shocking detail we mentioned at the start. Peter requested to be crucified upside down, head downward.
Yeah, and early writers like Ignatius used this story as a profound model of enduring faith.
I mean, imagine you are a first-century believer facing the Roman arena, right?
Yeah.
Looking at the prospect of wild beasts or public execution.
It's terrifying. So the story of Peter's ultimate humility and courage in the face of the cross, it became a powerful psychological anchor for them.
Right. It showed a persecuted community how to die with dignity, reinforcing their faith precisely when the empire was, trying its best to break it.
Exactly. So the ancient texts, from coded scripture to the early church fathers, they consistently place Peter's death in Rome.
But, texts can be forged
Yeah.
or exaggerated over time. The real question is, what happens when you actually dig into the dirt beneath the Vatican? Does the dirt agree with the texts?
And that transition from textual clues to physical archaeology is really where this narrative shifts into high gear.
So let's set the geography for you. We're talking about Vatican Hill, near the ancient Via Cornelia, right next to the Circus of Nero.
Which was the exact site of the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, the place where Nero executed masses of Christians.
Right. So fast forward to 1939. Pope Pius XI dies, and his final wish is to be buried as close to the traditional resting place of Peter as possible.
Which sounds simple enough, but
the current St. Peter's Basilica is one of the heaviest, most massive structures on the planet.
yeah, it's enormous.
So ordering a delicate archaeological dig beneath its active foundations, it's honestly like trying to do a delicate archaeological dig in the basement of the Empire State Building.
Or playing Jenga with a priceless monument while millions of people are walking around upstairs. The engineering challenge was an absolute nightmare.
I can't even imagine.
They were navigating these narrow, suffocating tunnels, terrified of collapsing the basilica right on top of themselves. But what the archaeologists uncovered, led initially by Ludwig Kaas and later by Margherita Guarducci, was staggering.
What did they find?
They found an entire ancient subterranean city of the dead, a beautifully preserved Roman necropolis containing both pagan and Christian mausoleums side by side.
And right in the middle of this necropolis, they excavate an area they dubbed Field P. And there they find this structure known as the Red Wall.
Named for its distinct red plaster, obviously, and they dated it back to around AD 160.
And what's crazy is what was built into that wall.
Right, built directly into this red wall, positioned perfectly over a very modest, simple dirt grave, they found a small memorial chapel.
Okay.
It featured a distinct travertine slab, essentially a shelf made of a specific type of limestone, and it was supported by two small marble columns.
And this is huge because it matches up with another ancient source perfectly. The Trophy of Gaius.
Exactly. So around the year AD 200, a priest named Caius, or Gaius, was engaged in this heated theological debate with a rival.
As they did back then.
As they constantly did. And to prove his church had the true apostolic authority, Caius boasted, "If you go to the Vatican, I can show you the trophies of the apostles who founded this church."
And by trophy, he didn't mean like a gold cup.
No, in Roman terminology, a trophy was a monument marking a military victory.
Right, and for early Christians, martyrdom was the ultimate victory.
Exactly. So the limestone and marble structure found by the archaeologists built into the red wall perfectly matches Caius's 3rd century description.
But the handling of the actual physical remains inside that grave. That is where the story gets super chaotic.
Oh, it's an archaeologist's worst nightmare.
Yeah, so Ludwig Kaas, the initial administrator of the dig, was reportedly so terrified that the workmen would disrespect any sacred relics they found, that he would routinely go into the site at night.
Just secretly by himself.
Yeah, and he would secretly remove bones for safekeeping.
Which he did without proper archaeological documentation, no context, no photography. He completely ruined the integrity of a modern excavation.
Just a guy with a box in the dark.
Yeah, pretty much.
So years later, Margherita Guarducci enters the picture. She was an epigrapher, right? An expert dedicated to decoding ancient inscriptions and graffiti.
Right. And while studying the walls, she literally stumbles upon a wooden box of bones sitting forgotten in a storage area.
The ones originally removed by Cuss.
Exactly. So she immediately has them analyzed by anthropologists. And the methodology they used in the 1960s to test these bones was actually rigorous for its time.
What did they find out?
Through osteological analysis, examining the wear on the joints, the density of the bones, the cranial sutures, they determined the remains belonged to a single, robust man, aged 60 to 70 years old, dating back to the 1st century.
Wow. And the brutal realities of Roman execution were also visible on the bones.
Yeah, the bones showed signs that the feet had been severed.
Which sounds gruesome, but it makes historical sense. If you are a Roman soldier tasked with clearing a crucifixion site quickly, prying thick iron spikes out of ankle bones takes way too much effort.
Right. It is much faster to simply chop the feet off and lower the body.
And furthermore, the soil residue found clinging to these bones matched the specific chemical makeup of the original dirt grave under the red wall, not the later marble repositories they were moved to.
So the scientific data was compelling enough that in 1968, Pope Paul VI publicly announced the relics of St. Peter had been convincingly identified.
But we do have to apply a crucial caveat here.
Oh, absolutely. Absolute. Definitive certainty is scientifically impossible. I mean, there's no 1st century DNA database to cross-reference with an apostle.
Yeah, we can't exactly track down a living relative of Peter for a cheek swab.
Precisely. However, for historians, the ultimate value is really in the context, because Guarducci spent years decoding the massive amount of overlapping graffiti on the wall directly abutting the grave.
And it was just a chaotic mess of ancient pilgrims etching prayers, invoking Peter's name, essentially leaving messages saying Peter is here.
Yeah. The dirt grave was surrounded by coins dropped by travelers from across the known world, dating from the 1st century all the way up to the 15th century.
So whether or not those specific bones belong to the historical Peter, the archaeology proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that early Christians absolutely believed he was buried there.
They venerated that exact patch of dirt for centuries before Emperor Constantine ever built a basilica over it.
But, and this is a big but a heavily venerated grave, is still just a grave. To build an empire, the early church had to prove that Peter's authority didn't just die with him in that dirt.
Right, they had to prove it carried on.
Exactly. So we have to shift from the physical tomb to the ideological superstructure built on top of it.
And this brings us into the theological realm from our sources, specifically the concept of apostolic succession and the primacy of the Bishop of Rome.
The foundation for this entire ideological empire is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 18. Jesus tells Peter, "Upon this rock I will build my church." And crucially, he hands him the keys of the kingdom.
And those keys are more than just a poetic metaphor about, opening heaven's gates.
Right, they have historical baggage.
Definitely. Theologians link this specific imagery back to the book of Isaiah, chapter 22. In the ancient Davidic kingdom, the key of the house of David was given to a prime minister or steward who ruled with full authority whenever the king was away.
Okay, so it was an actual job.
Yeah, the steward literally wore a large key on his shoulder as a badge of office. It is language deliberately evoking dynastic succession, an official role that outlives the specific individual holding it.
And early Christian writers were just obsessed with proving this continuous chain. Like Irenaeus meticulously compiled lists of the men who took over in Rome after Peter.
He was very thorough about it.
He was. He lists Linus as the 2nd bishop, and the sources note that Linus supposedly ordered women to veil their heads in church, and then he's followed by Cletus and then Clement. They were desperate to show a clear, unbroken line of authority.
They really were.
But I have to ask, did Jesus actually intend for this keyholder job to be passed down like a corporate CEO title? Or did early church leaders invent this whole apostolic succession later just to maintain order?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this strict single-file line of succession, what scholars call the monoepiscopacy, where one bishop rules an entire city, it emerged partly as a crisis response.
A response to what?
To massive threats. The early church was in a state of absolute crisis, fighting off these complex heresies, and the most dangerous of which was Gnosticism.
Ah, the Gnostics.
Yeah, Gnostic groups operated almost like ancient conspiracy theorists. They claimed to possess secret, hidden knowledge passed down privately from Jesus to a select few VIPs.
Right. Knowledge that wasn't available to the general uninitiated public.
Exactly. So if you are the mainstream church, how do you combat an invisible claim like that? If someone says, well, Jesus told me the real truth in secret, you can't exactly disprove
They
it.
combat it by creating a public, verifiable chain of custody for the truth.
You nail it. The mainstream church argued, we don't rely on secret whispers in the dark. We have a public, documented chain of teachers passing the doctrine down from person to person, going all the way back to the original apostles.
And in that high-stakes environment, the Church of Rome possessed the ultimate trump card.
They had the physical proof.
Yes. Rome claimed the graves of both Peter and Paul. It was the only church in the Western Roman Empire with that level of physical apostolic pedigree.
So if a community was confused about a Gnostic teaching, the logical solution was to go to the city where the chief apostles were buried and consult their direct successors.
But of course, once you establish a boss, you inevitably get arguments about what being the boss actually means.
Always.
Right. Once the idea of the Bishop of Rome holding the keys took root, this massive world-altering debate erupted over how much power those keys actually granted.
And that argument ultimately tore the Christian world in half.
Yeah, this is the ideological crossroads where the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church diverge. Both traditions accept the concept of apostolic succession, but they look at the exact same texts and arrive at two fundamentally opposed models of authority.
And the sources offer a really brilliant way to visualize this divide for you.
Yeah, think of the Orthodox view like a modern franchise model.
Okay, a franchise.
Right. In a franchise, every individual store fully represents the brand. So for the Orthodox, every local church that gathers around the Eucharist, the central communion ritual of sharing bread and wine, is the complete whole Catholic Church.
So there is no such thing as a partial church.
Exactly.
Huh.
The local bishop, as stated by early writers like Ignatius of Antioch, holds the place of Peter for that specific community. Therefore, all bishops are essentially equals.
Right. But the Roman Catholic view operates entirely differently. It functions much more like a massive corporate headquarters.
Okay, lay that out for us.
In this model, the church is a single, worldwide, visible organism. While all bishops succeed the apostles collectively, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is the singular, exclusive heir to Peter.
The ultimate CEO.
Pretty much. He holds a unique, supreme authority over the entire global body, possessing a veto power over all other bishops. And this centralization of power evolved over centuries, eventually culminating in 1870 with the First Vatican Council officially defining the doctrine of papal infallibility.
It is wild reading through the historical tracts and seeing these two massive traditions clashing over the exact same ancient paragraphs. Like, the biggest historical flashpoint in the sources is a treatise written in the 3rd century by St. Cyprian of Carthage.
Ah, yes, on the unity of the Catholic Church.
That's the one. Cyprian writes heavily about Peter's chair.
And the interpretation of Peter's chair became a huge theological battleground. Roman Catholic scholars read Cyprian's mention of that chair as early definitive proof of papal supremacy, like evidence that Rome was universally recognized as the absolute boss.
Right, but Eastern Orthodox scholars look at the exact same sentences and argue that Cyprian meant every single bishop sits in Peter's chair equally within their own local diocese.
And as proof, they point out that Cyprian actually engaged in a bitter feud and openly defied the Pope of Rome during his own lifetime over how to handle local church disputes.
It's like, I respect the chair, but I disagree with the guy sitting in the other chair.
Exactly. But you have these two divergent theological frameworks, and they weren't just debating in a vacuum. This ideological split was heavily fueled by massive tectonic shifts in global politics.
Yeah, the politics and theology became completely indistinguishable.
For instance, in the year AD 607, you had the Roman Emperor Phocas officially declaring the Pope the universal bishop.
Wow.
But simultaneously, the real center of political gravity, the wealth, the military might, all of that was shifting eastward to Constantinople.
Which was proudly styling itself as the new Rome.
Right. So the patriarchs in the East began viewing the Pope in Rome as just one patriarch among equals, while the Pope viewed himself as the supreme monarch of the universal church.
And that collision of egos, theology, and geopolitics made a breaking point inevitable.
It did. It finally culminated in the Great Schism of 1054. The tension snapped when the Pope's legates literally marched into the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople and dramatically slapped a bull of excommunication right on the main altar.
Just right there on the altar.
Yeah.
Excommunicating the Eastern Patriarch.
And the Patriarch immediately excommunicated the Pope's delegation right back. That moment officially split the Christian world into Catholic and Orthodox factions, a staggering cultural and spiritual division that remains unhealed to this day.
So bringing it all together, what does all of this mean for you? listening to this deep dive.
Yeah, why does it matter?
Whether you approach this as a devout believer, a strict secular skeptic, or just someone fascinated by history, this story demonstrates the terrifyingly high stakes of historical memory. We are looking at how interpreting a few ambiguous lines of ancient Greek text and venerating a handful of buried bones can literally shape empires. The debates over what happened to a fisherman from Galilee redrew the maps of Europe, launched crusades, and defined the spiritual and political lives of billions of people over 2 millennia.
It is a profound testament to the power of human belief. And, while we have spent a lot of time discussing ancient schisms and excommunications, the sources highlight a really touching modern resolution.
Oh, right, the event from a few years ago.
Yeah. In 2019, Pope Francis took 9 of those heavily disputed sacred bone fragments from the Vatican tomb and gifted them to the Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew in Constantinople.
Wow.
It was a bold, highly symbolic gesture aimed at healing that exact Quen 54 rupture. Rome took its most foundational, fiercely guarded physical claim to authority and shared it with the East in an act of humility.
That is pretty incredible. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final kind of mind-bending detail from our sources to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire time talking about Rome and the Vatican Acropolis, right? But in 1953, archaeologists excavating a cave on the Mount of Olives near Jerusalem found a collection of first-century ossuaries, ancient bone boxes used in Jewish burials.
Right.
One of these boxes bore a very specific inscription. It read Shimon bar Yonah, Simon, son of Jonah.
Which is famously the original birth name of the Apostle Peter.
Now, most mainstream scholars heavily dispute that this box belongs to the Apostle Peter, largely because the inscription lacks the title Cephas, or Peter, and Simon was a very common name back then.
Sure.
But it raises a deeply fascinating hypothetical question for you to ponder. Imagine if future archaeology conclusively, without a doubt, proved that Peter never actually left Jerusalem.
Oh, wow.
What if his bones were sitting in that cave all along? How would a 2,000-year-old global institution built entirely on the premise of a dirt grave in Rome adapt to that reality?
That is a staggering thought. Can an institution survive if its foundational historical claim is completely upended?
Or is the symbolic power of the keys, the idea of the office, the theology, and the centuries of tradition, is that now stronger than the literal bones beneath the altar?
It really forces us to ask what truly supports the weight of an institution. Is it the physical, verifiable foundation in the dirt, or is it the towering centuries of human belief built on top of it?
Exactly. When the concrete of history isn't perfect, human belief just fills in the gaps, building these skyscrapers of faith that can withstand millennia. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.